who is the scientific director and head of France AI and genomics. Ramzi is a bioinformatician leader with 15 years of international experience. He has experience of working with biologists, clinicians, and scientists in academia, hospital, biotech, helping them to analyze large-scale biomedical data and solve complex research questions. And Ramzi is responsible for establishing and supporting collaborative partnerships within the French biomedical R&D system, as well as leading and managing AI and genomics activities in France. Very interdisciplinary. Hello, Ramzi.
Hi, Vera.
And we have Michael Schnappinger, who quite recently joined Alteryx, and he's been responsible for sales team engineering there for Central and Eastern Europe. And he leads a very motivated team of sales engineers that he has set up himself and with the goal of putting the slogan democratization of analytics into practice. So really looking forward to hearing from you, Michael. And the last, hi, and the last panelist is Balash Shastmari, who is the panel member representing the health insurance side of industry. Balash is a biologist and computer scientist who spent a significant part of his professional life in strategic consulting and IT industry, and then founded his own e-health startup before he joined AXA. And in AXA, he's responsible for the global IT strategy of AXA health insurance entities. So great panel, looking forward to the conversation. So let's start with a brief question to each of you, so you can introduce your key thoughts on the area before we open it up. So Joanna, my first question is for you. What do you think makes a strong data community? So that doesn't necessarily data science community. Let's open it up. Let's talk about data communities as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, Vera, for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here. I think it's a great question, right? What makes a strong data community? And as we already discussed, data communities gather people to collaborate around a common interest and goals that involve using, manipulating, or processing data in some way. And what I think that are the main obstacles to effective collaboration and communication are organizational complexity, and then having information scattered across multiple tools and usually limited to a specific group of individuals. So having said that, there exist some key characteristics, I believe, that distinguish strong data communities. And you should for sure start cultivating these in your organizations. And these are, for example, good tech support, efficient and easy access to digital tools is in fact key to breaking down silos that we've already discussed during your presentation, removing friction, driving engagement and improving adoption. Then diversity among the members is also extremely important because it leads to diversity of thought. Then integration of activities within data communities into core processes and making them actually a part of employees' daily workflows. I think this is also quite important because it cultivates the change of behavior. And lastly, a strong sense of purpose. And it's very important for the employees to understand the why behind creating the data community and also feel personally motivated by the company's success, in addition to other motivators such as, for example, growing career, increasing salary, or enhancing internal recognition. And this would be my take on that.
Great, thank you very much. So if start thinking about questions for Joanna based on that and put them in the chat, and we will come back to Joanna in a minute after everybody made their opening remarks. So Ramzi, may I please go now to you for the opening remarks? And the question for you is, what are the major challenges in building data science communities?
Thank you, Vera. And I think you give a good overview trying to explain the challenges building such community. I might take an example of my postdoc time, or basically my PhD time, where I used to be in a computer science group with working with computer scientists, and there we have like kind of similar goal and backgrounds. And in the middle of my PhD, I moved to a hospital when we were embedded working with clinician, biologists, and doctors. And it took us sometimes to get to a little bit understand each other. So we had like a weekly meeting where one time is a biologist or a clinician presenting, and the other week is a data scientist. And what we realized is there's a very big gap of understanding between the two community. And what we end up doing is trying to each time that bioinformatician presenting, just to ask some of the other community to sit with the presenter, go over the presentation, trying to simplify it, to bring it to the terms where the other community understand it, and vice versa. And it was really impressive how that small action tried to change the perception and also the communication between the different community. So again, as this example show it, the major challenge is really driving a middle ground of communication, because if we talk between data scientists, and again, I would maybe challenge later my colleagues on that, the problem is like, how could we leverage that variability in the knowledge and trying to make a minimum understanding between the different community or expertise in the group, to ensure that there's a communication between the groups. Because I think this is the major point that we want to create this community, is this transfer of knowledge between the different entity and an alignment on the goals that are aimed, because we all serve the same goal. We want to get better treatment for the patient. We want to get a better healthcare system, but the different community have a different contribution. So the moment there's that alignment, I think things becomes easier to bridge the gap between the community.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll pick up on that interdisciplinary aspect, Ramzi, and importance of knowledge flows. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michael, I would like to come to you now with a very sort of a high level question. Let's go all the way back and ask ourselves, so why community? Why should people be attracted to become part of it?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. I guess actually, yeah, it's obviously that community makes sense, right? And all of us agree that it's important to work together as a bigger group and work on problems we see out there and help as a community. And the bigger it is, probably the better it is, to get different kind of aspects and help solve those problems. Nevertheless, I think it's still really important to the success of a community to understand of why we should build a community. And that is not the reason of, is a community reasonable or not? It's more or less understanding about what is the mission of a community? What do I really want to bring up, or what is the benefit or the problem behind it I want to solve? And I give you just a little example, as we have also a kind of community, not a kind of, but we run a community with an Alteryx as well. And we have a clear statement that is, we want to democratize analytics. And what that means is actually just the goal or the intent of the overall solution to make it possible for each and everyone to make more out of the data, to get insights and data and be able to work with that. And that touches a little bit on actually what Joanna was saying before, what Ramzi was saying before. I mean, really spreading it up, making it sure that we have a touch point for each and everyone, different kind of individuals with different kind of background, to really make it easy to work together. And another thing is always the motivation behind it. Why should I work on it? And that could be in one thing that I get more or less a personal benefit, and that could be several kind of reasons. In our case, for example, it's about the platform itself. It's about an ability to learn from others, to get ideas of what can be solved, ideas of what can I look into, and also to have something I just can grab and use and do not to reinvent for myself. And I think this is really important. And I want to invite each and everyone here to join our community as well and see if that is of use for you as well, and give us feedback, because that's something we can learn from as well, right? So thank you very much.
That's great. Looking forward to hearing more about the democratization of analytics, Michael. So I'm going to ask Balázs a quick question. While I'm doing that, please start putting questions or comments or any contributions into the chat. I'm sure many of the participants, you have your own stories and key points that you would like to raise. I'm monitoring the chat. So I'll take the questions from it afterwards. So Balázs, you have quite different background from the rest of the people on the panel. So you kind of represent the health insurance. So I guess my opening question for you is about ingredients for successful cooperation between health insurance and pharmaceutical industry. And maybe I know you have a project called Digital Health Platform. Maybe in relation to that, you can mention some of the key points.
Yeah, thanks very much, Vera, and thanks for having invited me to this panel. So let me just start with a statement that I think that private and public health insurance companies, or payers as we call them, are playing more and more important role in this context, although we are not at the core of the data science communities. And this is because next to the out-of-pocket spending, we are paying the bills from the patients and the providers, and therefore also indirectly from the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. In addition, payers are more and more transitioning from a purely administrative company who are just creating products and contracts and paying the bills to active market players who are trying to influence care pathways to the benefit of the customers. So we are intrinsically interested to improve the quality of care at reasonable costs. And this is what I think the pharmaceutical industry is trying to reach as well. Now, data science might sound a little bit far away from real life applications of pharma products and solutions, which are relevant for payers and the customers, but in fact, they are not. Quite often, even in the early product development stages, data science is related to and relying on real world evidence, as we have seen some good examples from Vera mentioned in her presentation. So pharma companies are interested to gather data and information from users of the products, be it providers or patients. And we also know that pharma companies, without a few exemptions, typically don't have direct access to the latter group, to the patient group. The good thing is that payers have good access to patients, and we have a lot of data, a lot of historical data, probably not as detailed as a provider, but most often for a much longer period and for a lot of patients. And it's also important to know that there are strict regulations how we can use this data. Nevertheless, this data can be a valuable asset for pharmaceutical companies at any stage of the product development. This is the connection, I think, to the data science communities from the pharmaceutical industry. So coming back to your point about DHP, AXA is one of the insurance companies who are actively building an IT platform, as we call it DHP, to collect and share data. DHP stands for Digital Health Platform. And we're also working on a so-called research workbench, which should be connecting us to the pharmaceutical and other research interested parties. I'm happy to provide more information after this slide. And we already started reaching to pharma companies who are interested to join our platform, which is not an easy exercise. And this is where I wanted just to share 3 learnings with you from our journey so far, which might be beneficial for the pharmaceutical companies on the call. First of all, pharma partners should not rely only on customer context from the insurance side, from our side. Our patient database is a valuable asset, and we are happy to share it. But as the value of a network is relying on the number of users, a good cooperation assumes that pharma companies will also contribute to the growth of the platform by leveraging their connections, for example, to doctors, hospitals, or patient groups. Second thing, as you know, pharma companies are often looked at by patients and the public as commercial entities who are trying to maximize their revenues. Patients and insurance companies sometimes blame them even that they are getting wealthier on the back and the budget of these groups. We know this is not true, at least not true for most of the companies on this call, but we have to proactively address this concern, as we would be in trouble if a cooperation between a health insurance company and a pharma company would leak out to the public and accusing us that we're only increasing this problem. So any cooperation should be positioned as primarily improving the quality of patient care and saving costs rather than trying to sell more products. This is more a marketing topic, but I think it's important to keep in mind. And the third and last point, as a consequence of the second point, I think any joint project should be as much product agnostic as possible. What do I mean by that? I mean that, for example, a project managing diabetes, let's say financed by Bayer, should not try to exclusively position Fineran, but rather leave the prescription decision to the doctor. If your own drug is the best for the specific indication, it will automatically lead to increased sales. So I assume that most of these topics were known to you anyway. I just wanted to highlight them from insurance perspective. And this is the end of my statement. I'm happy to over the microphone back to Vera for further questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Balázs. So we have an interesting question in the chat from Max Gramalia. Thank you very much for that. That's a very practical question. So it's not directed to anybody in particular. So please, let's just discuss it. So what are the different organizational approaches to tools and data sharing as an enabler to work across groups of people? So that's a very practical question. How do we actually know? Do we have the data? And then what are the tools to connect? Would anybody like to go first to comment on this?
I could take it first, but I like to turn it a little bit around and move it a little bit more towards a strategic perspective, because I think there are two key important things to drive data engagement in organization in general. And this is already something what we discussed, which is why we do it, but there is also the what associates can do to help. And I think this should be really propagated at every level of organization, because why will be the same perhaps, but what would be quite different depending on where people are. So in this context, there are some useful tools that can be helpful, such as models for behavioral change. And one example could be COMB method. And in brief, COMB method highlights 3 key dimensions that need to be evaluated in order to increase the probability of behavioral change. And we have capability, opportunity, and motivation. And capability basically asks the question, do I have the right skills and knowledge to perform a certain behavior? And this will be, as you see, very different depending where people sit. Then opportunity, does my environment allow me to perform the desired behavior? So first, do I have the skills? The second thing, do I have the tools that allow me to connect, for example, with others? And then last thing is motivation. So is there sufficient motivation for my behavior to occur? And I think instead of just thinking about specific technological solutions or something else, I think it would be very important to have this kind of very strategic exercise and think about these different aspects that allow people to come together in data communities.
Thank you, Iana. We do have other questions, but would anybody else like to add anything?
Sure, Vera. Actually, I think there's another important aspect is really on trying to have kind of a master catalog for the data. Because usually, as you mentioned in your presentation, there's pocket here and there, and sometimes people on the other side of the world and sometimes on the next door are not aware of such type of data exists. And it's also important to collect metadata to be able to have more information about the data itself. And once you have these 2 components, then there's multiple technical solutions that probably might help. And again, there's no right or wrong. It depends on the use case, because you don't have to have all the data on the same place with one tool, but rather have like a strategy that cover all the type of data that are existing within the organization, and then starting to strategize how to address project on the short and the long term.
And if you're talking about data catalogs, I'm not that sure that it's the same strictness in the early research phase, but as you move more towards the treatment and real world evidence phase, there are quite good existing data structures and data elements which you can use. Now, for example, you have the FHIR standard to use patient information, you have ICD codes for diagnosis, all this stuff. So I'm pretty sure that there are also some other standards in earlier stages of product development. And I think if you are not only know what data you have, as mentioned by Ramsey, but also you're trying to use structures which are acknowledged within the industry, that might also help in this context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So, Michael, I have a question for you, if that's okay. So, let's talk a little bit more about what makes a community successful. I think it's a very open discussion. There's lots of different ideas. Would you like to open us up on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely, and happy to do that. And actually, I think I mean, as I said before, it's mainly about what do I want to achieve and what do I want to get out of it. I mean, actually, it adds quite well to the question we also had before, right? And if you move it a little bit higher as a stack, it's at least about how do I define my community, what kind of tools, what setup do I have, and which people do I want to work together? Is it a community which is a business community which is related only to one company, to a set of companies? It is a wider range of people all over the world working together. Is it only data scientists, or is it a variety of different people with different knowledge working together? And at the end of the day, is it with the target of making business out of it, or is it more an open source kind of approach where people work together to share and learn? Or at the end of the day, is it both? And how do we get it together, right? And I think it's also helpful to look a little bit in other industries to learn what others did. And if you think of, for example, probably each of you know and have heard about it. If you think about GitHub, this is a nice example of how that could look like, right? I mean, they had actually, I don't know, did they have a mission? Now they for sure have it, but what they did, quite simple, is they reinvented the way of how we develop or program applications, right? From a former situation where actually a small group of developers were sitting together programming one application end to end. Now it definitely changed because we are more seeing that those guys become consumers who can go to a repository and take things others created and put it together and build a totally different application out of it. Even the applications look different today. So this is a totally different industry, but I think it has many touch points, and there's many things we can learn from that, which enable us and help us to really create an open community that is also helping us in the specific pharma area or in the data scientist area to create a lot of benefit and sharing in all over the world.
Thank you very much, Michael. Are there other thoughts from the panel, please, about what makes a community successful?
Yeah, I think as Mike said, there's multiple way of evaluating that, and depends on how you define your objective. And I think it's a dynamic process. You might end up starting with specific metrics, but along the journey, you realize that there's other things that evolves and sometimes it's quantifiable where you can measure with metrics, but sometimes it's something you see and feel, but you could then put on paper. And and I think, just to relate to another point is like we're also trying to get to community of community, because Mike brought the example of the GitHub in one way, and like you might have another example where people could connect to different community, but there's no right or wrong, and that's where sometimes you don't belong to one community, you can be part of multiple community, and the way you organize that might be dependent on the structure of the company. But for sure, these interactions are very important, and having this partnership would be very beneficial if you set the right stage and you put the right condition, as you mentioned in your slide, Vera.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ramzi.
So just one last comment. So our experience with communities is that typically the hardest time is to get it up to speed, to reach a critical mass of participants, right? Because if you have just 5 people on it, is not enough. If you have 50 who are also engaged and interactive and sharing and also contributing, that's good. And I think this is the most crucial phase to get a community up and running. And I think this is where the moderator or whoever is organizing the community has the biggest impact and role to make it a success. And then you need to get in more and more people. Once it has reached a critical mass, there's enough interaction between the members. But I think to build a community from scratch where you have no members, let's say, 20 to 50 members, depending on the purpose of the community, is the most crucial part of the community building, and this is where the community organizers and moderators have the most critical role, at least from our experience.
Very good, thank you very much. So let's change tack a little bit. So I have a question to Joanna initially, but we're talking about data communities and data science communities, but it's very difficult to achieve without promoting the company-wide data literacy. So Joanna, I think you have some experience of that. Please, can you share with us, and then others can contribute as well?
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you so much. So in many companies and across industries, because this is a common problem for everyone, there are situations where the data teams don't have the business perspective to understand the data and the expected outputs, and the business teams don't have the tech skills to deep dive into raw data. I think this is the biggest really problem at the very core there is there. And I think in this crowd, it is already for us a common knowledge that companies that fail to boost the data literacy of their employees will unfortunately be left behind because they are not simply able to use the vital business resource, which is data, to their business advantage. And I think the first step in data literacy is the ability to write and read about data in context. And later on, employees, not only data scientists, this is extremely important, need to be able to critically assess the data, extracting the meaning from the numbers, and then getting actionable business insights from it. It is important because employees with expertise in business area are going to be the ones that are best able to act on data insights and create results, and then uncover new insights and opportunities. So putting data to use, not just collecting it, is the key to the future of business. And I can propose maybe some step-by-step guide on how we could, for example, do it. The first step would be just evaluating the current literacy within the organization, then identifying fluent data speakers, data gaps, and importantly, translators who can bridge the gap. Then coming back again to the things that I said before, communicating the why behind the data literacy is important, ensuring access to data, breaking down the silos. Then it will be important to create also a pilot data literacy program. And then once we validate that it really fulfills the needs of the users, expand it to a larger audience. And as Balázs said, importance of stewards of data is really extremely critical here. So having these stewards for data that are prioritizing the data insights in their work and then leading by example, it's something super valid here. And that would be my take, but I'm really curious to hear also from others.
Thank you. Just before others contribute, we had a question from the chat that's related. So maybe in your answer, you can touch upon. So we have a question from Igor Mladenovic from Data IQ about what tools do you use to boost data literacy among business users? So if you try to incorporate talking about the tools in your contribution, please do. Anybody would like to?
I mean, I can jump
Michael?
in. For me, it's quite obviously which tool we are using, right? So actually, I think it's an important point. And I think what Joanna touched on is actually a great explanation of what we understand with democratization of data, right? Because that actually is our belief. We really want to make sure that people who have a touch point on the business side and look at it not from a data science point of view, have the ability to use a simple to use tool and set of applications to put together the data they need, make sure that they get the insights they need to have. Because what we often see actually on the market, and that is probably aligned with what Joanna meant, is that actually the amount of data scientists we have in the environment is quite limited. So what we always get back from our customers is, if I want to get a report which gives me an insight on the data I have, it consumes a lot of time because actually it takes weeks to get there because there's actually so much workload on the data science team. So our target is to really free that team up and give it in the hands of the business side who have a simple and easy to use tool where they can get the benefits out. And as Trevor said as well, right? It's really those people who understand what they need to look for. I mean, that is, they have an idea of what kind of data they need to get a better insight and can align the business they do, right? And that is exactly what we want to do. And in between that, there are for sure different roles in the company. It is data analysts. This is simply just really people looking at data, getting reports, mainly consuming it, and others who have a deeper insight, but probably are not data scientists. So there's a lot of roles in between. And what we see is really, and that touch points also on the community we are talking about, is although there, it's really important to be a part of community because that helps them to adapt, helps them to get new ideas, helps them to use their tools and make it, I mean, one of the tools they use day by day, right, at the end of the day. So what we clearly see, for example, in companies going that path, no matter if it is with our tool set or with others, if they are committed to a community and have a team that takes care of it, right, the progress or the speed up kind of times they need to really make the company work with this and get a strategic tool out of it is by far faster if they do that, if they leave people alone with the program.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. So we have only 2 minutes left. So please, may I just, let's go very quickly around the room and have 30 seconds if you have, if you would like to make any concluding remarks or points that you haven't had a chance to share, then let's do this in the remaining 2 minutes. Ramsey, perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, I think, you know, like data community are important, and I will say we should think of it as also part of an ecosystem, because if data communities are more focused on the people, but then we have the technology, we have the interaction, and you know, we have this internal external partnership, because we think of data community mainly within the company. So it's sometimes also good to look outside of the company, how we can complement each other. And I think, yeah, it's really the strategy, is the interface, is creating that minimal understanding between the different community to have this knowledge transfer and communications.
Thank you, Ramsey. Any other final thoughts from anybody? Joanna?
Sure. I think what would be very important is just not building data communities for the sake of data communities, and just because it's an important thing to do, but really being very user obsessed and understanding and finding this really deep understanding. Why do we do it, and what do we really want to address, and what is the biggest pain point of my users that can be helped with data, I say. So keeping that in mind, I think will put us in a great path to building very engaged data communities.
Great, thank you very much. Balázs, a couple of words from you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what I said in my introductory statement. So I think, from a health insurance or payer perspective, we might be not at the core of this topic, but we would very much like to be part of it, because I think we have a lot of things to contribute. We have data, we have access to patients. So I would just like to encourage the pharmaceutical companies, if they talk about or think about external data communities, not only within the company, also think about the health insurance industry, and we are happy to be a partner of you. And if any of the companies are interested, we are happy to continue discussions at the one-to-one level. So thanks.